All right, so let's break down a few things in this solo. What I wanted to mention real quick, when I was speaking to Tim, he was telling me how he really focuses on, motifs, call and response. Target notes are a big thing. All the standard things that you learn when you're studying music. I mean, there's so many concepts, and then you actually don't even think about the concepts; they just become part of you, and that's what we're trying to get out of this lesson. As far as that's why I keep repeating that. Oh, this is the same as this phrase, or this is a call and a response, so that you can actually see what that means. A lot of times, people hear call and response and they don't really understand what it means, and it's basically doing an idea. I'm sure people could describe this better than I can, but it's basically doing an idea and then doing an idea that isn't opposite of it, but it might be. It might be like you're running up and then the response to it is running down a scale. Another thing is doing a phrase a certain way and then maybe offsetting it rhythmically, but it's a very similar phrase, so that would be a repeat of a phrase, even though it's slightly different. And you can get a lot of mileage out of doing that, as opposed to just playing a lick, then playing another lick, and doing. If you really think about these things, it'll really make your solo come together, as opposed to just sounding like a whole bunch of licks they've heard you play over and over. Now, the other thing is that's really important, and he was mentioning that on this solo he really took into consideration, is the melody line. So everybody knows the melody for the Happy New Year kind of thing. And he really took into consideration every line that he was doing in the solo was calling back to that melody or that point in the song where the melody is and targeting those notes. So when you're targeting notes, a good thing to do is, again, if you look at this phrase here where he goes, right, that's ending on this note here. So that beginning phrase goes, then it goes down that arpeggio, but that's pretty much the target note. Now the second part of the phrase is, right? So now you end it on that note. Now the third part of the phrase, which is the response, so these two are the same phrase basically. Right? Then, but slightly different. This one walks up chromatically. Then the response to that is, right? And if you notice where that's going, right here and right here, those are pretty much the target tones. Right? And then he's targeting that note. This is in the key of C, so everything he did so far is just outlining a C triad. So you have, right? That's that note there, which is the major third of C. Right? So if you do an arpeggio, right? Then that second note that he targets is the same as this note here. So, right? It's just the next note in the triad. And then, or this note here when it goes, right, is just this note, or, right? So he's really targeting chord tones in this whole thing. And even this, he's walking right down that C major arpeggio, right? Then, so you have. So that's one thing to pick out of this. Again, instead of running a whole bunch of licks, really start focusing on chord tones and what chords you're playing over, and then target those. If it's a major chord you're playing, target the major third. If it's a dominant chord, target the major third or the flat 7. And you don't just have to play the note, you could lead into it. Like here, he's walking chromatically up. Right? Here he's walking chromatically down. Right? So there's a bunch of different ways you can get to these tones. But really try and focus on that in some of your solos. And take it really slow. Do it methodically, where it's a really slow tempo. and just start doing phrases instead of licks and target certain tones. So that's the first point I want to make with this solo, and we'll move on to the next point. All right, so the next section I want to break down a little bit is that response to those first two phrases, which is, right? Now, if you look at that, it looks really chromatic-y, right? Which is a really cool phrase. But you could start doing these, making your own phrases up. Think about it if this originated, say, in just C major. That's the same pattern, right? You have 3 notes on the first string, 2 notes on the next string. Then you're pivoting off of this note. I'm sorry. Or where you're pivoting back and forth, which was this phrase. Or in the major scale. Or then you get a unison note out of that. So in order to hip that up, right, you start throwing in some chromatic notes. And it just sounds a little cooler. Now you get to that note. Instead of doing, you have, right? So you start messing around with the notes. Now I don't know if this is where it came. I'm sure it came just out of his ear. He's used to some of these patterns, and he knew he wanted to target this note. And then he was just doing maybe a pivoting thing here. I'm not really sure, of course, what his thought process was. But to me, I'd come up with these ideas because I'd know I want a little chromatic movement here. I don't want it to sound real scalular. But I know I want to mess with these notes here in the C major scale. So, you know, you could do things like that where you're doing that. We've talked about that little motif that Alan Hines does a lot. You know, now I'm just messing around with doing C major and throwing in a chromatic note here and there. And you'll start learning some chromatic movement like this. Right? That move there is really targeting this note. You'll get familiar with patterns like that, and then you'll start being able to use those in your own playing. So again, just to kind of emphasize what I'm trying to get at here, take a major scale and start throwing in a chromatic note every once in a while. Or instead of running down a scale here, like C major, right? Instead of doing that, just do the chromatic part here. Right? So I'm thinking C major, but I'm thinking first chromatic, and I don't want to go 4 notes in a row chromatic, so I'll do. Right? That's just messing around with some chromatic tones. So that's what I wanted to get out of that part there. So let's move on to another idea. So the last part I want to break down is the section that goes like. Right? Now we've already talked about how it's a call and response kind of thing, and there's that chromatic movement, then there's those arpeggios, right, which have all the same kind of feel as far as playing a note, then sweeping down, and then pulling off to another note. But what I wanted to get into is, when I transcribed this, I had it goes by really fast, so I had a hard time picking out exactly what notes were being played. And when I transcribed it at first, I thought it went. So, played that note, right, which is a little bit out. Then it went. And I thought, again, it went back to that note. And this is what I wanted to talk about. Well, I spoke with Tim for a while, and again, very generous with his help and his information. And he said when he played this, he wanted to have, he had a goal in mind. He wanted this to be a very old school feel of this swing kind of thing. And that just rhymed. And sorry. So he didn't play any out notes. So this was with chromatic notes. But when I transcribed it, I thought it was, which was a little bit out sounding. And what I wanted to talk about is when you learn these ideas, experiment with notes. Because just because it's played one way doesn't mean you can't play it other ways, or start inserting different ideas. So take little things and change them up a little bit. So this part, you know, if you want to play this thing, you can either play it like this, all diatonic with the chromatic note in there, or you could play, introduce that note, or when you do the second part, right, instead of doing this, you can mess around with those notes. You can do, right, or you can do this. So instead of this note, you're playing this note now. So that. And they're little subtle things. I mean, it's not going to make or break a solo, but it definitely adds flavor to what you're doing. Now, again, if you want it to sound very traditional and old school, kind of straightforward, you're going to want to stick more diatonic. But if you want to hip it up a little and get a little more fusiony, modern, you may want to throw in some of those out notes every once in a while. So it was just something I really wanted to talk about, because when I was transcribing it, I played it a different way, and I thought it was cool that you can actually mess with those notes and really get a different sound. So that's about it. That was kind of a long lesson, but it was a pretty long solo, actually, and there's a lot of cool concepts and ideas in there. Again, we're going to do more stuff on Tim's playing, and we're actually hoping that he's going to get involved in a few things, which is going to be really cool, because he's just got so much knowledge, and I mean, he's got so much knowledge on so many aspects of playing. But one of the big things that I really like about his playing is the Ted Green stuff. If you have not checked out Ted Green, go to his website. I'll put a link down here below. I think it's tedgreen.com. Amazing guitar player. Not just he also has some books that he wrote, and I would highly advise getting those. The one's called Chord Chemistry, another one, and then there's another chord one. I don't know if it's called, I don't remember what the second one's called, but he also has a book called Jazz Solo Lines, or Solo Lines 1 and 2. Awesome, awesome books. They're not tabbed out, so you have to have sight reading going for you, but you can be really slow with your sight reading. There are charts with dots all over the place, and the chord melodies and stuff, but I would highly check those out. Highly recommend checking those out, because they're amazing. I've been looking at them for about 15 years now, and I go back to them constantly, and I learn new stuff. So that was a long speech, but I hope you go get those things, because Ted was an amazing player and had so much to offer. So anyway, I hope you guys like this lesson. Go to guitarbreakdown.com if you get a chance to see some updates of what's going on. We will be updating a lot in the coming month and a half. And keep coming back to these lessons. Click like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. Share it with your friends. Help us build a community. And we will continue to put out these free lessons. Write us. Let us know comments and suggestions and all of that good stuff. And we will try and respond to as many as we can. And your suggestions are always taken as far as ideas of what you want to learn. We've got a huge list that's growing. And we are trying to get to as many as we can. So thanks again for stopping by, and I will see you on the next lesson.